Hello students, let us understand cognitive development in childhood, the Vygotsky's perspective. Let us understand in detail from introduction. Human development cannot be understood without considering how historical social changes affect behavior and its development. Knowledge is seen as a social created by society and transmitted to the individual. Neither child nor adult, therefore, processes stimuli as simple reflections of the real world. Instead, both apply internalized historical and cultural factors to their sensations. When development is approached in this way, major cultural changes such as cars, computers, mobiles, TV are seen as perhaps altering how we perceive the world, categorize it, think and organize our inner consciousness. The two most important theories in developmental psychology, part of human development in the area of intellectual or cognitive development in children, assumed discontinuous changes such as the theories of Lev Vygotsky and Jean Piaget. Both believed in cognitive development was discontinued but progressed in definite stages. They differed in their premises. However, each tells a different story about cognitive growth. Concepts, language, voluntary attention, logical memory, everything that distinguishes the human mind from that of the chimpanzee comes from the culture and begins between the child and another person. Each of these functions appears twice in the child's development. First, shared between the child and a more competent person, an interpersonal process, and then inside the child, intrapersonal process. Lev Simonovich Vygotsky, the Russian Lev S. Vygotsky, was a contemporary of Piaget and Werner. In 1917, he graduated from Moscow University and until 1923, he taught both literature and psychology in Gomel. In 1924, just after Soviet psychology has officially adopted reactology, an approach to psychology that depended upon behavioral reactionist in a Marxist framework, Cole and Scribner in 1978. Vygotsky returned to Moscow to work at the Institute of Psychology. His views did not coincide with the major European approaches to psychology, which were either introspective or behavioristic, as was reactology. Nor did the Vygotsky find the Gestalt psychologist's attempts to study behavior and experience as whole a very satisfactory solution. Vygotsky believed that the study of psychology was the study of changing processes. For a people responds to a situation, they alter it. One of his complaints about Piaget's theory was that the Swiss psychologists did not give enough weight to the influence of the environment on the developing child. Vygotsky believed that the internalization of social and cultural activities was the key to the human development and that internalization distinguished human beings from animals. In some respect, today we might regard Vygotsky as a psychologist who was interested in human cognitions, for his primary areas of interest were in thought, language, memory and play. At the end of his life, he worked on the problems of education, but Vygotsky was also trained as a physician and advocated the combination of neurology and physiology with experimental studies of thought processes just before his death from tuberculosis in 1934. He had been asked to head the Department of Psychology in All Union Institute of Experimental Medicine. Vygotsky died at 38, but His influence on Soviet psychology continued through his students who hold major positions throughout the Soviet Union. For years after his death, Vygotsky had no influence in North America. But in 1962, Thought and Language was translated and his idea entered the American psychological community. With each passing year, his notions about the relation of thought and language and the nature and uses of play have received more attention. In 1974, his essay Mind in Society were translated and published. During Vygotsky's youth, his country underwent the Russian Revolution with the theories of Marxism. Marxism was developed by German philosopher Karl Marx in his period from 1818 to 1883 and is a political doctrine that stresses important points. First point, activity generates thinking, development advances by dialectical exchanges that forces individuals to think about their thinking. And the second point was development is a historical process within the culture. As a scholar, Vygotsky tried to apply Marxist ideology to psychology. Vygotskian's theory can be described as the implementation or translation of Marxist political theory into psychological terms. Dialectical psychology first became prominent when Soviet psychologists were searching for an approach that would fit comfortably within the Marxist framework. Its major advocate was Lev S. Vygotsky. Shortly after the Russian Revolution, Vygotsky proposed a way of looking at human development that viewed mental activities as taking shape in a marker of social history. Society, he believed, was essential to human development and starts since birth. As children reconstruct a process according to Vygotsky, they move through the same point at each new reconstruction, but on a higher level. With each new level, they gain more and more control of their behavior. Development is neither an accumulation of small changes in behavior nor a single upward line. In each succeeding stage, new responses are carried out in new ways under the influence of different psychological processes. In recent years, American psychologists have come to regard dialecticals as a helpful tool. When adopting the dialectical approach, researchers look at development in a new way, one that stresses social interactions and the influence of the wider society. When we study cognitive activity, for example, this approach has led them to look at its goal, remembering an appointment, and to study thought and action together. Formerly, they may have focused narrowly on cognitive processes, memory, and separated thought from action, according to Rogoff in 1982. Vygotsky's stage model. Vygotsky proposed that any mental function, such as thought or language, appears twice in the course of development. The first time a mental function appears outside the child. That is when children are presented with cultural tools, such as words or problem-solving strategies. When they initially use a function, the tool is not quite theirs, yet it is borrowed over a period of time. However, they will use the tools over and over again. Through routine and practice, they will gradually internalize the tool and make it their own. To internalize something is to incorporate it within the self, either consciously or subconsciously, as a guiding principle. This is achieved through learning. The stage model proposed by him charts the progression of this process of internalization of making a culture or a cultural tool one's own, because he believed that language and thinking starts off as separate mental activities. Vygotsky proposed different stages from them. The development of language. The language, the most important cognitive development in human development for any kind of communication or interaction. According to Vygotsky, language goes through 4 stages of development from birth to about the age of 2. Children are in the primitive stage of language. The essential quality of primitive language is its lack of intellectual function, that is, it does not involve thinking. Language begins with emotional releases such as crying or cooing. They are followed by sounds for social reactions such as laughter. In the primitive stage, the first words emerging as substitutes for objects or desires. For example, children say daddy when their fathers walk into the room, or milk when they see milk, and because they are hungry. The words are merely a conditioned response. Children learn that the while liquid they drink is associated with the sound milk, but the word has no meaning in their minds yet. They would not know what milk was without seeing it first. The second stage of language development happens about the age of 2 and its term naive psychology. Children at this stage show a remarkable increase in vocabulary, mostly because they actively ask to be told the names of the things. Words are no longer conditioned here, and children begin to understand the symbolic value of words and what it is that they represent. This stage is called naive because although children make grammatical correct sentences, they do not yet understand the underlying structure of language. The third stage of language development is egocentric speech and emerges around the age of 4. It is called egocentric because most of the speech of the children at this age is not addressed to anyone else. Rather, children perform monologues with themselves, especially during play. Children playing while often use different tones of voice as they act out different ideas. For Vygotsky, this form of speech marked the emergence of an important new intellectual tool. Speech influences children's thinking, which in turn influences their speech. The interaction between speech and thinking marks the emergence of verbal thought. The advantage of verbal thought is that it allows the child to plan a solution in the course of solving problem. You can hear children using verbal thought when they tackle a tricky task such as tying shoes. Adults sometimes even revert to the stage by thinking out loud when they are faced with a difficult problem. The fourth and the final stage of the person's language development is the ingrowth stage. At this stage, the child develops an internalized form of egocentric speech, the sounds that serve a similar purpose to verbal thought or problem solving. At the same time, the functions of thinking and language becomes inseparable. Thinking becomes a form of inner speech, and at the same time inner language develops into a form of thinking. Let us understand the development of thought. Vygotsky believed that development of thinking goes through 3 distinct stages. In the first stage, children think to unorganized categories. The representation children initially form are trial and error, grouping objects and events and combining in a random manner. Progressively, the child begins to notice that some events happen at the same time as others. Thought is a social or cultural event. For example, the child begins to associate the appearance of the parent with being cuddled. By the end of the first stage, however, categories are still unorganized. The difference is that by the end of this stage, children are dissatisfied with their categories. This causes frustration that motivates the changes that brings forth the next stage. The second stage in thought development is termed thinking is complex. For Vygotsky, a complex is coherent basis for categorizing objects or events. At first, complexes are based on any relationship children notice between objects or events, color, for example, or shape. They then begin to use collection complexes based on contrast rather than similarities. For example, if they are asked to group cutlery, they will put a table setting a fork, a knife and a spoon in each set rather than putting all the forks or knives together. During the second stage of thought development, the complexes grow more complicated but are still based on perceivable features of objects and events. It is only in the third stage, conceptual thinking, that objects and event can represent based on abstract properties, such as being able to recognize a shape or a pattern in a series of dots or identify a face in a Picasso's painting. At third stage, children analyze and synthesize information in more sophisticated ways. Language plays an important role in the achievement. Children have already learned to combine language with thinking in the first stage, and in the second stage, language and thinking are closely tied together. Words can guide or shape thinking, and results of thought can be communicated and expressed through language. The role of play and tutors. According to Vygotsky, play is one of the two most important ways to stimulate development. As explained earlier, children use egocentric speech during play. Speech allows them to guide their activities and also helps them internalize speech and make it a sophisticated mental tool. For Vygotsky, playing takes place in the zone of proximal development, which he meant that when children have the guidance of an adult or more capable peer, they are often able to carry out tasks they could never complete by themselves alone, because activities are complex that goes beyond children's current levels of development and towards their potential levels. For example, with an adult standing by to give advice and help out in the difficult places, a child can bake cookies, measuring the ingredients, mixing the dough, forming the cookies and baking them. The skill appears first in interaction with the adult. Later, the child may learn to bake cookies without any assistance. The width of this zone varies from child to child. With the help of an adult, one 6-year-old may be able to complete a task meant for 8-year-old. Another may be able to handle only tasks meant for children who are 1/2-year-old. Vygotsky believed that instead of waiting until children can learn a task without working at it with an adult, teachers should concentrate or cooperate instructions in the zone of proximal development. He maintained that only good learning is learning that proceeds ahead of development. The child also experiments in novel way with the other tools provided by culture. During play, children learn to use mental tools that are not yet internalized. This learning promotes development, although they can do it when they are playing together. It is a trial and error process because they have yet to learn the tools that will take them beyond their current level of development. For example, consider babies who have yet to learn words. They babble, coo and react to speech sound from others. They are almost ready to utter their first words. Other babies of the same language level cannot help them utter words because these tools are also beyond their current level of speech development. the best that could happen is that babies will coo and blabble together. However, older children who have mastered word utterance could provide the right sort of stimulation for both babies. By stimulating younger babies, language within the ZPD, that is the zone of proximal development, they could be helping them say their first words. Some American psychologists have adapted Vygotsky's idea of the proximal development to classroom problems, with lessons that require student and teacher to engage in social interaction. Researchers have been able to help failing students understand and remember the material in their science and social studies textbooks. Other researchers have devised ways of accessing the child's zone of proximal development and aptitude test, which require children to work by themselves, fails to pick out those youngsters who could profit from instructions. By uncovering hidden learning potential, these assessment procedures could open the door to instructions that a child might be denied on the basis of an achievement test. Evaluation on the Vygotsky's work. Vygotsky raised awareness about two factors in intellectual development. In line with Marcus' philosophy, he stressed the influence of culture on development. Children are not raised in void, but in a social environment that provides specific pressure as well as an array of cognitive tools, the most important being language. Vygotsky also identified the important differences between actual development and a measure of performance tests and potential development as measured with potential assured with aided performance. With this distinction, Vygotsky proposed his notion of a zone of proximal development. The ZPD is still an extremely useful concept today, especially in education. The term scaffolding refers to the support given to the learner who is attempting to learn something new in the zone of proximal development. That support might include tools, hands-on activities or direct instructions when the student first begins to learn the new concept. The teacher will offer a great deal of support. Over time, the support is gradually tempered or trapped off until the learner has fully mastered the new skill or activity. Just as a scaffold is removed from the building when construction is complete, the teacher's support is removed once the skill or concept has been learned. Learning to ride a bike offers an easy example of scaffolding. At first, a child will ride a bike with training wheels to ensure that the bike stays upright. Next, the training wheels will come off and a parent or an adult may run alongside the bicycle, helping the child to steer the balance. Finally, the adult will step aside once can ride independently. Scaffolding is typically discussed in conjunction with the zone of proximal development, but Vygotsky himself did not coin the term. The concept of scaffolding was introduced in 1970 as an expansion of Vygotsky's ideas. Researchers such as Barbara Rogoff have expanded Vygotsky's work substantially, giving rise to the apprentice theory of development. Although Vygotsky's theory is clear, internally consistent, testable and stimulating, it has some important limitations though. The one, it is limited with respect to the range of data it can explain. Vygotsky's work focused primarily on language and categorization skills. It is unclear how his stages of development might apply to other forms of thinking such as problem solving or logic. 2. It failed to specify mechanisms by which children develop from one stage to another there is no description than explanation in his theory. 3. Vygotsky died before he reached the age of 40. He had lived longer, he might well have gone on to produce a broader and more comprehensive theory of developmental psychology. Let us summarize the Vygotskian perspective on cognitive development. In his theory, the dialectical theories of human development is heavily influenced by historical social changes. Knowledge is social, created by society and transmitted to the individual. At each stage of development, a person interacts with society to reach a new level of functioning. He discussed the 4 stages that helps in language development as primitive, naive, egocentric and ingrowth stages, and said that thought is not a part of every stage. He said that thought doesn't appear. It is a meaningful way of associating thoughts with the culture and expressing it in the language which requires a specific capacity to understand and interact. Vygotsky, the major dialectical theorist, maintained that the most important learning took place in the zone of proximal development, where children learn only with the assistance of a more mature individual. The other important ways in which development can be stimulated is through joint activity with a more developed person, such as an older child or an adult. Children at the same level of development cannot stimulate one another through the ZPD. Older children and adults, on the other hand, have usually mastered and internalized the tools that lie within younger children's ZPD. It provides a sort of stimulation that will help younger children progress from their current level of development and develop new skills that they will eventually internalize. Vygotsky believed that any function in the child's culture development appears twice or on 2 planes. First, it appears on the social plane and then on the psychological plane.